Hi, welcome to Audiobook Academy. This is a self-paced audiobook. There's no need to keep an eye on things. Just pay attention. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This is a book summary of Radical Acceptance by Brach. It wasn't until I accepted myself as I was, that I was free to change, psychologist Carl Rogers once said. With the help of Buddhist spirituality and meditation practices, radical acceptance aims to assist us in healing and personal development. How often do you wish that you could change aspects of your personality or become more like the people you admire? Deficiency and self-blame are common, and many people are caught in the web of self-blame for their so-called failures. While many of us would like to be able to celebrate the successes of others, we can get caught up in our own failures or feel envious of those who succeed. When we are criticized or don't perform at our best, we can feel vulnerable. If you look around, you'll see that most people share these feelings of inadequacy. There is a silver lining to this story. We can change our mindset and learn to accept ourselves, not only in the conventional sense, but in the radical sense as well. We can learn to accept a wide range of feelings and sensations while remaining fully present in the moment through meditation. Author Brach is a clinical psychologist and a leading Western teacher of Buddhist meditation. She shows us how to live more mindfully, rather than dismissing our feelings and moving on to the next thing. For more than 4 decades, she has practiced and taught meditation with a focus on Vipassana in Washington, D.C.'s Insight Meditation community, Insight Meditation. Developing compassion and cultivating a mindful presence can help us heal emotionally and spiritually. This brief summary examines how we get trapped in the trance of unworthiness, how Western culture is in part to blame for feelings of inadequacy, and how radical acceptance can bring us out of this trance. The sacred pause will teach us how to be kind and patient with ourselves when we're going through difficult times, as well as how to see the goodness in ourselves and in others. To wrap things up, we'll look at why Adam and Eve isn't a story that serves us, what we have in common with a tiger named Mohini, and what we can learn from a muddy statue. Have you ever had a dream that no matter how hard you try, you just can't get away from something? Many people read this dream as a sign that the dreamer is struggling with feelings of inadequacy. Those of us who have heard the adage that we're our own harshest critics know this to be absolutely true. We've been conditioned to believe that perfection is something we can all strive for, and we all have preconceived notions of who we want to be in the perfect world. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could let go of the weight of our responsibilities and simply enjoy the moment? There are many people who end up on their deathbed regretting that they didn't live their lives in accordance with who they were. It's often the case that our pain stems from a sense of not being good enough, which Brach calls the trance of unworthiness. This trance leads to feelings of shame and an inclination towards self-aversion, the feeling of being at war with oneself. It is impossible for us to truly express ourselves or have the self-confidence to live creatively, spontaneously, richly and abundantly if we believe we have an abundance of flaws. Has anyone tried to calm themselves down when they're nervous? Isn't it impossible? Unworthiness is a prison that causes us to engage in self-destructive behaviors such as excessive drinking, overeating, smoking or any other so-called coping mechanisms. We spiral into destructive patterns of behavior because we can't accept ourselves. Is the West to blame? Feelings of belonging are rare in Western culture because of the prevalence of inadequacy fears. Many of us, even though we have strong family and community ties, feel as if we're on our own when it comes to dealing with life's challenges. Our standards demand that we compete, and if our performance falls short of those standards, we're viewed as failures. The message that we're inferior if we don't meet high standards is extremely damaging, but where do these messages originate? Brach argues that this is a common theme in Western philosophical teachings. If we go back to the story of Adam and Eve, it is clear that humans are born with flaws and must change their ways in order to enter the paradise of God. There is something wrong with us and we are sinners because we are human, and this is taught to us from an early age. Original sin is what perpetuates the belief that people need to be redeemed from their sins. People's self-perceptions are shaped by stories like this in Western culture's origin of man myths. Western society is also known for its emphasis on competition and achievement. Those who aren't naturally competitive are made to believe that there is something wrong with them at a very young age. We aren't even allowed to bask in the glow of a job well done once we've completed it. Asked, what is the next step? As a result, living becomes a series of chases. We're always on the lookout for the next big thing, but we never stop to appreciate what we've already accomplished. In the absence of a sense of self-worth, acceptance, and belonging, our accomplishments are often hollow. So how can we learn to accept ourselves and strive for a more positive, healing perspective on what it means to be human? What can Buddhism teach us? In the real world, we can't escape the fact that we're all imperfect. Only imperfection can be described as perfect. Buddhism encourages us to let go of our attachment to the future and instead focus on the inherent goodness we all possess. We can reframe our feelings of being naturally sinful and flawed, and embrace being naturally loving and wise, if we look to Buddhism as a source of inspiration. According to Buddhist doctrine, we cannot avoid the presence of flaws in our lives. Accepting ourselves as we are rather than pursuing an unrealistic ideal of how we should be is preferable. By putting our focus solely on ourselves, chasing after goals, and fretting about the future, it's easy to lose sight of the things that keep us closest to one another and ourselves. This principle also applies to our expectations of others and our own expectations of how life should function. When it comes down to it, living is about being fully present in the present moment, accepting the beauty and pain of life as it unfolds in the here and now, and appreciating it all for what it truly is. Change is possible only through a state of profound compassion for one's own self. Self-love and positivity may lead you to believe that there is no need for any kind of self-reflection. Radical acceptance is not a passive acceptance of life's journey or a belief that we're all perfectly perfect. Instead, it's about empowering us to create our own change. Fear and shame encumber our lives, but when they're lifted, we're able to enjoy life and the people in it more fully. Do you ever feel trapped or confined? A white tiger by the name of Mohini might be a good match for you. During the 1970s, Mohini was a resident of the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. When Mohini was finally moved to a larger enclosure, she had spent years in a small cage. The zookeepers assumed she would enjoy her new, more spacious enclosure, but they were wrong. It took Mohini the rest of her life to wear the grass out under her claws from pacing in an area the size of her old cage. In spite of the freedom she was given, Mohini's mind kept her ensnared in old habits. Many of us, like Mohini, are stuck in our routines despite the possibility of greater freedom. It's also possible that we haven't questioned the things that bind us. Instead of iron and concrete, perhaps it's time to examine our own perceptions of our own worth and shortcomings. It's easy to believe that no matter what we do, we'll never measure up to the standards set by our own harshest critic. This negativity is what keeps us confined to our small and confined lives. Fortunately, unlike Mohini, we have the ability to free ourselves. Self-liberation is possible through the practice of radical acceptance as a mindset. With compassion and enlightenment, we need to face our experiences head-on with clarity and honesty. It's important to recognize how we're feeling so that we can act with compassion and ask ourselves if we're stuck in a bad habit of thinking or acting. Radical acceptance has two components: recognition and compassion. We won't be able to accept the experience until we can clearly see what it is. This is what the Buddhists call mindful awareness, and it is the act of observing things as they actually are without judgment. Patterns that emerge in our lives and the broader effects of our thoughts and deeds are all included in this concept. Compassion, on the other hand, is the ability to respond with tenderness and care. One cannot exist without the other. Compassion without recognition means that we will only be able to observe what is going on, but we will have no way of dealing with it. This can lead to self-pity, if we only look at things through the lens of compassion instead of self-reproach. Look at how we can embrace radical acceptance, recognition, and compassion from both sides. Use the sacred pause, the wing of recognition, in your meditations. The phrase, "just take a moment to pause and breathe," has been used on numerous occasions. Taking a breather can help us when we're having difficulty with a task. By doing so, we are better able to understand what is happening when we are enraged, irritated, or otherwise triggered. As soon as we're able to identify or name our emotions, we call this the wing of recognition. In other words, the first step to radical acceptance is to learn to pause. This allows us to tap into all of our abilities, including our minds and hearts. We have a tendency to get caught up in tired stories or to judge ourselves in the same ways we always have. In other words, we can recognize specific feelings if we simply pay attention to what's going on inside our bodies. Anxiety or anger can be identified with the wing of recognition. When we recognize our feelings, we can make room for them and give them more room with each passing time. This is the process by which radical acceptance becomes a way of life. Acknowledging our own emotions has a cascading effect. Being aware of our emotions allows us to be more patient and understanding toward others. Getting caught up in our own thoughts and feelings makes it easy to miss the cues that others are giving us. We may overlook opportunities to show compassion and empathy because we are too busy focusing on the task at hand. Because human contact is so valuable, it's important that we never let our own feelings get in the way of building bonds with those around us. In order to practice radical acceptance, we don't have to agree with or approve of everything that happens outside of our control, but can we be open to letting things happen as they naturally do? Rather than focusing on how to feel better, try to improve your ability to feel, as this will help you gain radical acceptance and practice. Self-compassion is an essential part of the wing of compassion. It is possible for us to open ourselves to the reality of suffering and then release it into an infinite heart space. It is only when we allow ourselves to feel our suffering that we can truly develop compassion for others. Assume you're chatting with a distressed friend. There is no need to pass judgment or make any changes when we are simply curious, seeking insight, and attempting to demonstrate compassion. There are times when we can be a little more self-aware. The times when we are most in need of self-kindness are those in which we are most hurt, angry, or afraid. In fact, when we need radical acceptance the most, it may seem impossible to do so. There are times in our lives when we are visited by difficult emotions. In order to respond compassionately when confronted with these feelings, we must first acknowledge them. We deprive our difficulties of their sting when we open the door and name them. As a result, we are able to respond with an open mind and a caring heart. Asking this question allows us to discover the source of our pain, and when we do, the power they once held over us dissipates. Radical acceptance is about reminding ourselves that we are good and deserving of love. Our suffering is caused by a misunderstanding of our true nature, according to the Buddha. When we find ourselves in a state of homesickness, he likens it to a state of being trapped in an identity that is less than who we really are. The story of the Golden Buddha is a good example of this. A Golden Buddha was once housed in a temple in Thailand, but it was destroyed by a fire many decades ago. After receiving word that an invading army was nearing, all of the villagers rushed to defend the sacred statue. The villagers covered the Golden Buddha in mud and concrete in order to hide its true value. To be expected, the army ignored the statue upon its arrival. The village was occupied by the army for a long period of time. Time passed, and the Golden Buddha that was hidden beneath the dirt and concrete was forgotten. While sitting in meditation at the base of the Buddha, the young monk was struck by an unexpected piece of gold that had fallen from his robe. Upon hearing this, the other monks rushed to the statue and began hammering away, realizing that they had discovered the Golden Buddha. The lesson in this story is that each of us is naturally golden, but we just need a little help chipping away at the mud and concrete. The difference between doing bad things and being a bad person is crucial in discovering our Buddha nature. In order to achieve radical acceptance, one must first find a way to reconnect with the inherent goodness that exists in both oneself and others. Isn't it possible for us to accept that we all feel pain and desire to be free of it? What if we were able to see the humanity in others and feel empathy for them? End of the story. It's easy to get sucked into our own stories. We get sucked into a hypnotic state. A powerful way to break out of this state of mind is to practice radical acceptance, which allows us to take a more active role in our lives. It is Brach's belief that Eastern Buddhist practices can work alongside Western psychotherapy to help us heal and grow as individuals. Rather than ignoring or repressing our feelings, she encourages us to welcome them instead. Brach provides us with the means to break free of the trances that we so easily fall into, allowing us to move forward in our lives. Taking a step back and becoming fully aware of everything that's going on within and around us is the first step in developing this skill. Moreover, if you're unfamiliar with the concept of loving kindness, this book is here to help. We can practice radical acceptance and compassion by incorporating personal stories, case studies from Buddhist teachings and meditative practices from Brach's book. So if you're looking for a light, intellectual read on how to avoid getting bogged down in your thoughts and instead focus on the here and now, then this book is for you. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Please don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. See you in next audiobook.